In this post-pandemic stimulus bear cycle, we saw many Bitcoin miners experience plummeting stock prices, and in some cases, bankruptcy filings.
Unfortunately, what happens for a lot of miners is they think that the good times are going to keep rolling, and they don't plan for the fact that the cycle is going to change in a very short period of time. The hardest time for you to be thinking about selling Bitcoin is when the price of Bitcoin is at the bottom.
Bitcoin mining underpins and secures the foundation of the entire Bitcoin network. It's a global competition of high-powered computers processing and confirming transactions that are stacked as new blocks added to the time chain. The growing industry of Bitcoin mining is often criticized, misunderstood, and faces a myriad of challenges, especially in the throes of a Bitcoin bear market. Just ask Fred Thiel, CEO of Marathon Digital, which is now the second largest holder of Bitcoin amid publicly listed companies.
We have just been through a very tough winter. Companies that had a lot of debt or they were doing financing of their miners, they were the ones who really suffered the most because of high interest rates. Price of Bitcoin dropped, they had to service the debt. Those of us that weren't in that situation made it through relatively unscathed.
In this post-pandemic stimulus bear cycle, we saw many Bitcoin miners experience plummeting stock prices, and in some cases, bankruptcy filings. Thiel says in the end, the market downturns harden the industry for when the bull once again makes its run, adding that this particular cycle was wildly amplified by the greater macro environment and unprecedented monetary intervention.
You went from money at 0% interest to the Fed raising rates, the equity markets drying up for those miners that had gone public. Unfortunately, what happens for a lot of miners is they think that the good times are going to keep rolling, and they don't plan for the fact that the cycle is going to change in a very short period of time. And then they're busy mitigating challenges all the way down, which is the hardest time for you to be thinking about selling assets or selling Bitcoin is when the price of Bitcoin is at the bottom.
Miners needing to liquidate to cover costs and debt obligations usually have two options: sell Bitcoin or the Bitcoin mining equipment, both of which have been going for bargain prices. Mining rigs, which are called ASICs or application-specific integrated circuits, are computers designed to do one thing: mine Bitcoin, and operations can have hundreds or thousands of them. But soaring energy costs around the world have added to the obstacles of financing mining operations.
This thing called the Ukraine war happened, and all bets were off. You saw natural gas prices go through the roof. Natural gas is a core part of the energy sector in Texas, for example. And you saw energy at times in the spot market at $300 a megawatt, which is significantly higher than any profitable point for a miner to operate at.
Thiel points out that even if the Ukraine war is settled soon, energy costs likely won't get a significant relief. So Marathon, along with other companies in the mining industry, are looking to alternative energy sources, including renewables and gas flaring.
We focus mostly on operating behind the meter at wind farms and then supplementing with grid energy when we need to. That wind energy we get at a very low fixed cost. We're also looking at alternative energy means where we can essentially own our own energy generation. And I don't mean that we're going to go buy power plants and become a utility. But you've heard of methane flare gas. There's some very interesting advancements going on in that space.
Advancements that are helping boost the economic viability of renewable energy projects. Wind farms in West Texas, where electricity is sometimes negatively priced when supply outpaces demand, have been a shining example of what Bitcoin can do for the green energy industry.
We can use up all the excess energy a solar site or a wind site generates, which is enough to make them profitable. And if they can be profitable, they can get the site financed. And if they can get the site financed, they can get the grid to connect to it. And over time, what ends up happening is they sell more and more energy to the grid, they sell less energy to us, and we move on to the next site. And so we act as this, think of it as a supercapacitor.
Some people assume Bitcoin mining is only an industry for massive companies with easy access to capital injections. But there's a healthy cottage industry of small-scale home miners around the world contributing to global hash power. And that number grew when the price of ASICs dropped.
Here we are in Minnesota in the garage of my friend Joe. This is an S19J Pro Bitcoin miner.
Here in the US, businesses like Upstream Data and CryptoCloak sell accessories to direct noise and heat as needed for residential homes and office spaces. and many of the miners contribute their hash power to mining pools instead of taking their luck to win Bitcoin blocks on their own.
You've heard stories about the person with a USB drive who wins a block. Well, that's most likely the only time in their lifetime they'll win a block. But if you join a pool, you'll get a consistent payout of some Satoshis, which over time will equal what your statistical winning should be. So the pools act like an orchestration layer. They're like the conductor of an orchestra. Miners are all the instruments. The conductor sits and decides, okay, miner number 25, you're going to start guessing over here. Number 27, you're going to start guessing over here. And they basically act as taskmasters for miners.
Joining a pool makes sense for most miners, but it does come with trade-offs. The protocol that miners use to communicate with the pool of their choice is called Stratum, and miners say some of its drawbacks include clunky usability and security vulnerabilities for miners themselves and the broader network.
Stratum 1 was essentially a way to facilitate the rapid increase in hash rate and controlling those miners in a way so they wouldn't be stepping on each other. So they could orchestrate so they would properly be sharing the load. As global hash rate has grown, there's now a need for Stratum 2.
Stratum 2 is expected to make communication between Bitcoin miners more efficient, speeding up the entire process and increasing the likelihood of potentially winning a block.
The other thing it does is it allows miners to decide how they want to mine, as opposed to relying on the orchestration layer. So it's actually decentralizing mining control of orchestration even more, potentially.
Any Bitcoiner will tell you that decentralization is one of the cornerstones of Bitcoin's anti-fragility. If power were to become too concentrated in a few parties, they could theoretically decide to censor transactions for any number of reasons, like government influence or personal gain. Stratum 2 allows miners to contribute hash power to a pool, but still retain the ability to decide which transactions make up their next block on the chain, essentially democratizing transaction selection, which is a good thing.
But we're still in early days of Stratum V2. It's not really generally available in pools. Miners have to implement it, the pools have to implement it. There's a lot of infrastructure that has to transition, and we're moving very quickly towards Stratum V2 because we think it offers lots of advantages.
Bitcoin miners around the world are championing the cause of Stratum 2 to preserve the spirit of an open-source, censorship-resistant, decentralized network. After all, the concentration of power and influence is what got us into this fiat mess in the first place. At a recent Bitcoin conference in Europe, Pavlinex, a product manager and one of the foremost experts on Stratum 2, provided his perspective.
I come from Serbia, a very small country where we did have history of getting our property confiscated. I can go into that and explain how former government confiscated the property of my grandfather. It is very important to me for Bitcoin to remain uncensorable, and Stratum V2 will allow that.
Bitcoiners are spreading the word, encouraging miners to test the Stratum 2 protocol and help with content and education, as they expect the upgrade to become part of the foundational infrastructure for the next tsunami of Bitcoin adoption.
I'm a fervent believer in Bitcoin and what it's doing to the financial markets, and I'm a very big believer in hard money. And I think that Bitcoin is going to have a very significant impact over the next decades on this planet.